right, everybody. Welcome to the David Wild Oaks podcast. And we have a special guest here today. Today, we are here with new author Julie West, who is also a Bible teacher, media personality, and being on air for Z88.3 in Orlando. She's been featured on Fox News, Michael DiGiorno Show, and many other media outlets. And Julie holds a degree in theology, youth ministries, and additional studies in counseling and cross-cultural communications. She has a husband and 3 beautiful grown children and a perfect grandson. Everybody welcome Julie.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for coming on today.
Good. Good to connect with you, David.
So, we're going to get into the book Exiting Egypt, which I find a very fascinating title. So, why now write this book?
I think it was God's timing. I, in 2019, went in for what was supposed to be a little tiny baby surgery outpatient thing. It ended up having all sorts of complications. They took out a 5-pound tumor. Lots of other diagnoses came: lymphoma, systematic sarcoidosis, POTS, all sorts of other things. And so before COVID lockdown started for the rest of the world, I'd already been in isolation for 100 days. I'd been feeling like the Lord was calling me to write at that time. And I just kind of kept feeling like I'm too busy, got too many things to do, got too many places to go. And it was almost like the Lord said, "Do you want to bet? Do you want to bet?" Like, if you're too busy to do what I tell you, we can make sure that you're not. So anyway, when I sat down to write, I didn't even know what I was sitting down to write. Initially, I thought I was going to be writing about David and his mighty men. Um, Pretty quickly, as I sat down to write purely out of obedience, it became clear I'm writing about Moses. And it was interesting, both my story, what was happening in the world, all paralleled the Exodus and the plagues and everything so closely. And there are so many themes that are still so relevant today. And so I guess that's the long answer. The short answer is just obedience.
So, what was going on in your life at the time of writing the book? What was the connection between Egypt and what was happening in your life, other than you already, being 100 days before COVID on lockdown?
So, what was happening in my life after getting those life threatening diagnoses is like the Israelites, couldn't go anywhere, couldn't do anything. I was sort of captive. And then this process started where, um, well, there's so many things in the Exodus that are so relevant for today. For example, like with the plague of darkness, that we think about it, we don't realize that each of the plagues is progressive, that each one is a little bit worse than the one that came before it, because we don't really think about what they are. And so a lot of times we think, oh, what's the big deal? You light a candle, you make a fire. Well, they did that every day of their lives. That wasn't a big deal. But this darkness was so oppressive that not only does scripture tell us that they were unable to get up and move from the places that they are, it was a darkness that you could feel that had weight, that it was also the idea that getting up, trying, moving is pointless. And for people living in the world today, I mean, really, okay, biblically, literally true. Okay. But there was this notion back then, and I believe it's true today, that every generation, the plague of darkness would come and try to steal our children, try to take them away. And especially when you look at the depression and the anxiety that's out there, pervasive today, not a rare thing, it's pretty widespread, that you've got entire generations saying, what's the point in trying to move? What's the point in trying to get up? Like with the plague of the locusts or big old grasshoppers, that the idea, it's interesting because yes, it affected Egypt, But it wasn't just about setting the Israelites free. That a big part of it, the introduction to it is, and you're going to tell your children and your grandchildren and for the generations to come. And the point was, hard times are going to come around again. Like they're promised, just like freedom was promised, hard times are going to come. And it's up to you. You need to tell your children, tell your grandchildren, yes, it has been so much worse than this before, but God brought us through. God set us free. That in my own life, what I was experiencing was so some of the symptoms of the sarcoidosis, because it's kind of weird. It's one of those diseases they've had on house,
So
believe it
was
or
that the
not.
diagnosis of the sickness, sarcoidosis?
Yeah, we started with lymphoma, then we went
Mhm.
to sarcoidosis, then they added POTS and Ehlers-Danlos and a number of other things. But so with the sarcoidosis and EDS and POTS, they can it can do what it wants. So I started having issues with my vision as so pain, extreme weight loss, no energy, no strength to do anything, horrible cough that wouldn't go away. But then it started affecting my vision, and they told me that it was very likely that I would lose my sight. And so I couldn't read the Bible anymore. Started um, started listening to the Bible. I'd hold my phone up to my ear. About this time, I
Wow.
started experiencing bouts of spontaneous deafness. And if you go deaf suddenly, and who even knew that was a thing? Like as kids, we
Yeah.
thought quicksand or like mudslides or flash floods. Nobody ever told us that it's a thing where people just spontaneously go deaf. And so on a semi regular basis, I all of a sudden would not be able to hear. Usually it would just be I'd go deaf in one ear and lose most of the hearing in the other. So if that happens, you also lose your balance because your equilibrium is gone. So I would lay in bed and hold the phone to my ear and listen to the Bible because I couldn't read it anymore.
So just talk about for a second your hunger to still listen to the Bible, because not many people would have picked it up. Why did you decide you couldn't see, you couldn't, hear? Why decide no matter what, I'm picking up this Bible and I'm listening to it? What was went into that decision?
Well, there's a certain point where you go, nothing else matters. I need to find hope. I need to find joy, that the only strength I have, the only direction that I have is the word of God. So it's funny because I could I could see, but I couldn't really read. And I had all sorts of dots in my vision. So I'd hold it up to my ear. And a lot of the English translations of the Bible at the time, new, better ones have come along, but they were kind of excruciating to listen to. I mean, just really bad. So I started listening to Orthodox rabbis because they do the sing song thing with their voice, and it was a lot easier to listen to. But they started giving the English, then the Hebrew, then here are all of the verses that correspond with it. And then here are all of the notes from the different ancient commentaries that would go with it. And when my physical vision and my physical hearing were worse than they'd ever been in my life, and when people were saying you might lose them completely, my spiritual vision and my spiritual ears, I was seeing and hearing God more clearly than I ever had before. And that was very much involved in the process of writing Exiting Egypt.
You had this spiritual hunger to listen to the Bible. You listened to it. So did you start writing after you were listening to it, or how did that influence your process to write? What was that like? What was that time frame like before you started writing?
As I'm listening, um, I would just start making little notes. I'd start scrawling notes. And I had sat down earlier, only out of obedience, like I mentioned, thinking I was going to write about David, ended up getting steered to Moses. And then as I was lying in bed and really contemplating what he went through, It's interesting that we that that is where I was, just laying in bed listening to the Bible, because that's what God had to prepare me to do, just to soak these things in. But like Moses was hidden by God in Midian for 40 years because he had to learn how to survive on the backside of the desert before he could lead people through. Elijah was hidden by God in Cherith, where he fed the widow and her orphan, and where the ravens were, and all of. And why was that? Because he was going to need to have compassion. That was just down the road from Jezebel's hometown, and so he was going to need to have compassion on the widows and the orphans and the places where his enemy was from, and understand, get a better idea of what that world was like. And then you have Joash hidden in the temple by God, because couldn't leave the temple for years, but hidden there because he was going to institute temple, the cleansing and the restoration of the temple. So he needed to know that place better than anyone else. And so he lived in there, never went outside for years. And so one of the interesting things that I think I've learned is, blessing tends to follow obedience. It's just a fact of life. That's biblical wisdom. But when we are stuck in a valley, when we are stuck in a place and it feels like I cannot move, I can't get going, I've got to, that the first thing we need to do is ask ourselves, have we truly been obedient to the Lord in every way he's called us to be? And if the answer to that is yes, then we have to go, okay, so is God preparing me for something else? And if it is, what is that thing? And by the way, Lord, you can have your way in me.
You mentioned obedience. Can you talk a little bit before the diagnosis? What was your life like, and how much has this diagnosis like radically changed you? How has God changed
Well,
you in this process?
through this process, well, I am doing much better than I
Oh,
was
that's
at
good.
that
Amen.
time. That there for a while, I was fainting spontaneously, sick in the active sense of the word for like 24 hours straight, and I couldn't get it under control. Even at the hospital, couldn't stop it. Constant pain, threats of losing my sight and hearing, unable to drive, you name it. Like I was locked down. Now, the interesting things is the major repercussions that stuck with me or from the meds I was on more than the disease. I still have it there, but my lymph nodes back down from 9 centimeters to 6 millimeters, which is tiny. I'm out there. I'm working. I'm functional again. But as I obeyed the Lord, and as I took steps forward in faith, bit by bit, my healing came. Bit by and it was funny because a lot of folks really prayed and they were sure that it was going to happen on that day at that time. And, and it was
Yes.
really difficult for me because two different extremes. I was going to Cincinnati to see some doctors, Indianapolis for others, Nashville for others, because when you've got a really rare diagnosis, multiple rare diagnoses, you've got to go where the specialists are, right? So I'm making those trips, and at one point I realized, oh my goodness, the doctors all think I'm going to die, and I'm kind of feeling bad for them because I'm like, they don't know. We developed relationships. I felt confident I was going to make it through. On the other hand, wonderful friends, wonderful believing sisters were sure that if I read this prayer, if I did this thing, if I prayed this thing, that I was going to be healed instantly. And by the way, God absolutely does that. He true, like the God who made heaven and earth, can do anything. But I already felt like the Lord had shown me it's going to get better before it's going to get worse. Like you're going to be okay on the other side, but this isn't like a 5 minute thing. This is going to be a real process. And so it's funny because when you're getting one message from the world and another message from people
Mhm.
within the church, And you've got to stand there and go, all of that may be true in the natural, or the word of God may say that this happens and it's all true. Here's what and I had to cling to what I knew the Lord was telling me.
Did you have to distance yourself from some of those people? Was it being too much? Because I'm sure, we have this compassionate side where we really want to see somebody suffer, be healed. So I'm sure you got a lot of prayers. But did you feel a bit overwhelming and just like, I need to go disappear for a little bit? This is getting too much.
You know, the merciful shelter, and I hate to even use that, the merciful shelter that the Lord provided me was that when it was really starting to pick up, and by the way, I am so thankful for every person who took the time to pray for me and really intercede for me. So I don't want to ever belittle those people.
Absolutely.
But when the COVID lockdowns happened, it sort of spared me from, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
there were still wonderful, faithful people who left delicious meals on the porch, and there were
Oh my.
folks who did fantastic things. I think the Lord spared me in that way because I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And some of the messages I was getting that I kind of felt like the Lord speaking to me, going, they just don't know. And the other thing is, a lot of times you couldn't get a doctor's appointment. Like you can't breathe, and they're saying, well, the only way you could see a doctor was to go to the emergency room, and then they wouldn't let you in if you were sick. It's like, well, and the other ironic thing is, so sarcoidosis typically manifests in breathing and coughing and stuff. And you literally couldn't get into a hospital with a cough. So I was like,
Wow.
because in order to get in, it's like, and have you had a cough? And it's like, well, yes, but it's not
Yeah.
that cough. Anyway.
What are some comforting words you would share with somebody who's going through these rare diseases?
Well, the things that I'd say is doesn't matter what the doctors say, doesn't matter what anybody says. It only matters what God says. And God brings people through. One of the amazing things that we've forgotten is we've turned freedom into a political word, right? And the reality is that freedom is a spiritual word. When we talk about sovereignty in church, we tend to make it like kingly and noble and big, and all of that's true. But we forget sovereign. Like when we talk about sovereign nations, the United States is a sovereign nation. What do we mean? It's free. It can do what it wants. It can act independently. And our God is free. And we were made in his image and his likeness. God wants us to be free because he is free, and we're supposed to be like him. That's free from every addiction. That's free from anxiety. That's free from fear. That's free from every affliction, that God sets us free. And also with that, as believers, we need to stay away from anything that has a tendency to enslave, because that if it has a tendency to enslave, that is automatically a road away from Jesus.
Let's hit on that for a second. What do you feel like is enslaving Christians today, or just enslaving people in general?
I think the number one issue that is, I may get off here and decide and change my mind, but right now, the thing that's coming to me is the number one cause of enslavement in believers today is not seeing God for who he is. That when we see God for who he is, we're not afraid to give, we're not afraid to live, we're not afraid to move. And we are not lured in by the world. We're not lured in by the chemicals, the drinks, the lifestyles, the fears, the poverty, that we have goals and that we're driven. It's fun. The plagues are divided into three different sets. The first is that you'll know that I am the God, who is that, hey, here's the proof that I am. And a lot of people say that, well, yeah, I think that there's a God. I think that there's a God. So a lot of folks can handle that one. Then the next one is that you will know me as the God who is in the land, that I am here and I am moving and I am doing things. And some people will go, yeah, God's moving, God does it. Not everybody, but some folks, they, the spiritual thing. And then in the final set, because like the plagues, the nature of God as he's revealing himself, it escalates. And in the final set of plagues, it is, I am the God who is superior to everything else. And a lot of folks today want to think, well, that's your spirituality. This is my spirituality. That's how you handle this. That's how you handle that. And we've got to be tolerant of one another. And it's sorry that maybe it's just that because we have become far too comfortable with the enemy. And sometimes freedom requires acknowledging just how comfortable we've become with the enemy and in his camp. And
Yep.
we've got to step away and go, if I'm going to be free, I'm not having anything to do with this.
Yep.
And we've got to be willing to call it what it is. I'd also say in recent years, the church has become far too polite. As far as, well, we don't want to upset people. We don't want to call sin for what it is. We don't want to. And it's like, no, if we're going to have people get free, we've got to say, sister, brother, that is not freedom. This is not a good road you're on.
Absolutely. Something I've been thinking about lately quite a bit is we have this belief system that we should not necessarily have a Christian government because not everybody here is Christians. We shouldn't infect our beliefs on people and spread our beliefs to people. We should learn how to get along and be along together. So I think, and I used to believe that, to me, that argument sounded really good and it sounded great because I was like, well, maybe it's true. But then one thing that started to change a lot for me is just understanding, one, who God really is, and two, we don't have authority to make that decision. God, we literally are breathing God's breath today, whether you're a believer or not. He has given you breath in your lungs, and he has created the heavens and the earth. And it's almost like going into somebody else's house and making up your own rules and not acknowledging the person's house who is there. So it's just like, we don't have the authority to turn around and tell somebody they can, live however they want to live without acknowledging God. He is so much bigger, and this is his place. I don't own anything in it. Whatever I have, God has allowed me and blessed me to have. And so I don't have the right to be in God's place and say somebody else can do what they want to. I have to really lean into what God is doing and what he's saying.
100%. I don't ever have the right to tell anyone it is okay to do something that God has said is wrong. And that's even true. That's even true with kids. Once upon a time, I was working at a Christian school, and if one kid hurt another, we weren't allowed to let the kid who was injured say, oh, that's okay. Because you do not have the right to tell them it's okay to sin against you. That what the offending child was required to say is, I am sorry I hurt you. What I did was wrong because, and list it out. And then the injured child would have to say, you are forgiven. Because they need to say it as much as the other kid needs to hear it. But it's interesting because if you look at what was required to enter into fellowship, when people want to talk about, well, we've just got to coexist and we've got to welcome everyone. And people who mock the Bible then will also go, and do you see, it's just being a good neighbor. It's just, they always use that line. It's just being loving. It's just, and there is nothing loving about encouraging people to live a lie. There is nothing loving in remaining silent as people are on the road to hell. And that God made specific requirements for reasons. And it is about offering the others escape. Like the interesting thing with Moses is, as Moses made micro adjustments in his own life, just out of obedience to the Lord, he was transformed. And as he allowed the Lord to transform him, everyone around him was set free. And
Mm,
I,
that's
like
really
you're
good.
talking about, there's this mindset that
Mhm.
I'm going to go through life and I'm going to keep my head down and I'm not going to
Mm.
make any waves and we'll just all coexist. And the reality is, when you adopt that mindset, you have a hand in enslaving everyone around you. It is
Ooh.
up to us. The more that we allow the Spirit of God to move through us and change us, it doesn't stop there. It impacts our churches, our communities, and our nation. And if we're seeing things go the wrong way, a huge part of that is the church's willingness to not proclaim that what God has done, over and over and over throughout scripture, including the Exodus story. It's, tell the people, tell the world, tell your children. Like, we are supposed to be proclaiming the truth, and we're supposed to be declaring the stories of what God has done. And we've kind of quit doing that.
Let's get more into the book for a second. I want to talk about this point that you brought up about how God dealt with the burning bush.
Think one of the things that I'd never heard anyone talk about before, and in my weak, frail state, when I saw it, it jumped out at me. We hear that Jesus wouldn't, uh, a bruised reed he will not break. That's how gentle it is. And he is. And the same God who wouldn't break a bruised reed, a worthless reed, also would not consume a worthless scrub bush. I mean, like, it's a big thorn bush in the middle of the desert. Who wants it? Who cares about it? Well, the God who created it cares about it. And even though there was literally no one on the planet who particularly wanted or cared about that bush, the God who made heaven and earth, the one who would come in a manger and lay on a cross, was so gentle with that bush that he manifest his presence in fire. The presence of God was in fire, and he was careful not to destroy that worthless scrub bush. And if that's how God will deal with something as worthless as a weed, how will he deal with us?
That's so good. Do you believe that we all have experienced this burning bush moment where God is reaching out to us and just saying, "Hey, I need you to stop and I need you to focus, and this is something I have for you"?
In one way or another, at different levels we have. There was a time in my husband's life where he was in this really restless phase, and I kept going, "What's going on with you? Like, is are you okay?" And he just, for a long time, kept saying, I think I'm waiting on my burning bush. I need to see that
Mm.
burning bush." And ended up going to this job interview in another state, in a state we never thought we'd live in. And lo and behold, where he went in to do the interview was a giant painting of what looked like a burning bush. And so it was funny because very much in that way it guided our lives, because of course took job, did all the things. But it's interesting how the more we are willing to see God, the more he is willing to reveal himself to us. The more we are thankful, the more we are obedient, the more he will manifest himself in our life. And in fact, if we want to know who God is, truly, we look at what he has done in the past. That's why I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What's he saying? Remember what I did for those guys, I'll do it for you. But if we are truly seeking God, if we care to seek God, he is a God who wants to make himself known. And he is a God who wants to set us free. The cry throughout scripture is Galatians 5:1. It is for freedom that you have been set free. And that is for everyone. God would that all men would be saved.
How does the Exodus narrative destroy the argument, "I was born this way"? This is something we hear a lot,
Oh,
especially
well,
now.
so here's a part of the story that people forget. After the burning bush, after he gets permission from his father in law, Moses starts to set out on the journey, and the Lord almost kills Moses. And why does he almost kill Moses? Um, because he has failed to be obedient in circumcising his son. And okay, the covenant of circumcision, it's so amazing when you think about it, because first of all, how do you say I'm all in 100% with no reservations? It doesn't go much beyond that. But
Yeah.
the other thing is, it also says everything in creation requires some pruning. God made wheat, we make bread. God created lumber, we build cities and towns. That we are supposed to be working in tandem with God. And if all creation requires pruning and everything needs to be trimmed back and cut back, and it needs to be a combination of us being obedient to the Lord and then the Lord transforming us, then saying this is the way I was born is saying I am not obedient to the process, because the process is a natural cutting away, a natural pruning of even the things that are the most innate to us. And of course, we know Council of Jerusalem in New Testament, it's not a mandate anymore for the church, but the principle is still there. We can't come into this world and go, well, this is how I was born. Whether that's about our gender or sexuality or our temperament. Recently heard somebody say, well, I can't help it. This is the way I am. And they referenced their ethnicity. And it's like, are we really going to blame our grandparents for the fact that we're being jerks? Like, come on. And where does the fruit of the Spirit come into that? Where is the love, the joy, the peace, the patience, the kindness, the goodness? That God is saying, I want every part of you. There is no part that is off limits, and that is every aspect of our life.
One thing that I would tell people a lot is that, and this is something God really corrected me on, and I had to stop saying. One thing I would tell people a lot is like, yeah, I just kind of do whatever I want to do. And for me, what that was leading me to say is that there's areas in my life I'm not being submitted to the Lord. And so he corrected me. He's like, to stop saying that. And then transition into, you are submitted to the Lord. No, you don't do whatever you want to do. Your life is submitted. And so now I no longer use that phrase. And I don't do that anymore because I'm submitted. I know you can't just do whatever you want to do. Be submitted to the one who created you.
And can I double down on what you're saying
Yeah.
there? Submitted is a place that you want to be, because submitted, if there's a general and you're the major and the general gives you an order, don't need to know why. You have your own authority, but I'm going to obey the general, right?
Yep.
And people talk about submission as if it's the same as surrender, and it's not. If you're not submitted, for example, the enemy army doesn't acknowledge that general's authority. And so what does the general do? The general, they're not willing to submit. So the general forces them to surrender. And he uses every bit of force that he needs to get it done. And so we either live a submitted life or we live a surrendered life.
Yep.
And it's a big difference.
It is. and one really hurts.
Yes. Yeah. And it's like, I referenced this in the book. Where I live, there's a church that has this huge billboard over the interstate that says, God's not mad at you. And I thought, it's such a bizarre mindset that's come along today. And maybe somebody needs to hear that. But let's face it, if God could be angry with Moses, if he could be angry with Aaron, if he could be angry with Paul, he can be angry with us. And if we are not willing to acknowledge that and bring ourselves into alignment and submission with him, we're going to be in for a whole world of hurt. And we need to quit telling people things that there is zero biblical basis for. And God can be angry at you and still love you. Like he truly
He can
can.
be. Yeah, absolutely. And
I've been
we don't
real
get to
mad with
tell
kids.
God how he feels.
Right, right.
We
And
don't get to
as
do that.
don't know the age of your kids yet, but as they get older, I promise you a day will come when you will love your kid. You may not like them that much that day, and boy, you will be angry, but
Yeah,
it doesn't mean they're not loved. Yeah.
absolutely. So, before we wrap it up here, I want to ask this last question. How do you feel like we are related to Moses and his calling?
Well, the same calling that Moses had is the same one that is on us today. You know, Moses wasn't called to work miracles, he wasn't called to do the supernatural. That's God's job. What he was called to do is listen, obey, watch and see what I will do. Listen, obey, watch and see what I will do. And it's funny because other than saying they're going to be free, he didn't give Moses all of the steps. And here's the one that blows my mind. Moses standing in front of the burning bush, talking to the Lord in the presence of the bush. And then the Lord gave him signs, right? And it's like, here's the sign of leprosy, here's the sign of all of these things. So he gives him all the signs. And then Moses goes, well, how can I know that this is true? Like, okay. And the answer that the Lord gave him is, when you find yourself back on this mountain, you're going to know it's true. When, and that's that God gives us promises. Time passes, we sort of lose track of things. Eventually, we end up back at that place where that sort of touchstone of our faith, and we look at all we've gone through it, and it's like God said to Moses, when you get back at this place, I'm going to remind you. Now for other people, they can have their signs, they can have all the other things, but for you, and the sign back then, the connection back then, the calling back then is the same as it is today. Like Moses was called, listen, obey, watch and see what I will do. We don't get every step, but that is for us today. And if we're watching, if we're waiting, if we want to see, we will.
We will. Yeah, I definitely think we can surely relate to Moses and just how he felt unqualified. And God didn't budge. He still stayed there and was like, "I'm still calling you. So let's go. Let's figure this out."
And also think about the insanity. So he's got the burning bush, he's got the signs, he's got Aaron, and still he's saying, as he speaks to the king of the universe, that he's not qualified to stand before the king of Egypt. And it's like, do you understand what's happening here, man? It is such a deep and beautiful story, and there's so much going on. And a lot of the times, I feel like most of us who were raised in church miss the most important. I don't want to say most important, but miss so much meat in the Exodus story because maybe we're too familiar with it. So we don't really read it. We go, yeah, I know that part. I know that part. And we skim right over it and ignore the great details.
For sure. Thank you for coming on. And I just want to say this. It totally makes sense that you have your degree in theology because I felt like when I was reading the book, it was from a professor that was talking. That's what I felt that for sure. And you went into so much detail and like I've never looked at the story that way before. So it was a very unique and powerful perspective for me. And I really appreciate it. And I thank you so much for taking the time to be obedient and write that book. I highly recommend everybody go and get it. And so I'll post a picture of that book and where people can buy it for sure.
And by the way, they can get it Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the normal places that you get your books. You can get it there, and really appreciate it. Oh, and can I tell folks one more thing? I've been
Yeah, go
having a
for
lot
it.
of fun with this. I found out that some different folks are using my book for their book clubs or their Bible studies, women's Bible studies, whatever. And if they like, and if they get the book to use for their Bible study, all they've got to do is contact me, and we can work that out through you, or they can go to my website, worthrememberingministries.com, worthrememberingministries.com. And I'm willing to Zoom in with them on their book club, on their Bible study, whatever, at least once, answer their questions, interact with them, whatever they need. I'm happy to do that as long as I can, because it has been so fun. And I've gotten to talk to people from Long Island and Texas and all California, all over the place. It's been amazing. And I've loved doing that.
That sounds like a plan. We will post where everybody can find that. Are you on social media platforms? Where can people find you on social media?
Yes, I am on Threads. I'm on Instagram at Worth Remembering Ministries. You can also find me Julie Exiting Egypt. And you can look me up, Julie West. But Worth Remembering Ministries is a great way to find me.com. And
Awesome.
that has the links to all my socials.
Well, thank you guys for joining on. I hope that you got so much from this episode. I did. What a wonderful testimony and what an amazing book. Thank you, Julie, for coming on. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you next week.